Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating economic puzzle. I want you to imagine an economy that is somehow classified as underdeveloped, yet at the exact same time, it's heralded around the globe as the world's fastest growing. It's a massive paradox of progress. I mean, how exactly does a nation balance widespread poverty and structural hurdles with explosive technological growth and a world-class service sector? Well, by the end of our time together, you're going to see exactly how these conflicting forces interact and why they are completely reshaping the global market.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by mapping the economy, examine the underdevelopment hurdles, look at the mixed economic model, explore the shift toward development, and finally break down the planned and federal structure.
Section 1. Mapping the economy, structure, and sectors.
Before we jump right into the paradox itself, we really need a baseline understanding of how production and employment are categorized in India. Think of this as the economy's DNA. It basically breaks things down in three distinct ways. First, you have occupations split into primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. Then, the workforce is divided by working conditions. You've got organized businesses following strict regulations and unorganized, smaller enterprises that don't. And finally, everything is split by ownership into public and private sectors. It's definitely a complex, multi-layered system, but keeping this framework in mind is absolutely crucial to understanding where the real growth is happening.
Now, I want you to mentally bookmark this tertiary or service sector. We're talking about transportation, communication, banking, trade, and insurance. Think of the IT support, the digital payment systems, and the global logistics networks that power our modern lives. Keep a close eye on this one because, as we'll see in just a minute, this specific area is the absolute powerhouse pulling the rest of the modern Indian economy forward. Moving right along to Section 2, the underdevelopment hurdles, demographics, and poverty. Let's look at the first side of our dichotomy here, why India, even more than 7 decades after independence, still deals with some severe traits of an underdeveloped economy. And a lot of it starts with this number, 1.43 billion people. To put that into perspective, that is literally 1 out of every 6 people on Earth. Surpassing China, India is now the world's most populous country. And this massive, constantly growing demographic puts just immense pressure on land, natural resources, and the urgent need for constant job creation. The economic reality of that population pressure is pretty stark. While India's overall gross domestic product is massive on a global scale, when you divide that wealth by 1.43 billion people, it dilutes it dramatically. We're talking about a per capita income of just under $2,000. Compared to developed nations like the UK and the USA, it's vastly lower, and it remains a deeply entrenched indicator of underdevelopment. But, the hurdles definitely go beyond just income. Get this. A staggering 42% of the labor force is tied to agriculture, yet that primary sector only generates 18% of the nation's GDP. That is a massive productivity gap. Combine that with widespread malnutrition, chronic unemployment sitting around 8.2%, and underemployment hitting 21%. Add in outdated rural technology and severe infrastructure deficits like inadequate transport networks, and the sheer scale of the underdevelopment challenge becomes pretty undeniable. Which brings us to Section 3, a mixed economic model, public and private harmony. So how do you combat those massive hurdles? Facing vast poverty and infrastructure gaps after independence, India chose a very careful balancing act. They went with a mixed economy. On one side, you have a socialist approach, where the public sector, owned by the government, takes charge of strategic, basic, and heavy industries. On the other side, the private sector brings the capitalist drive through privately owned businesses. So planning and free market mechanisms essentially function side by side to steer the nation. But 1991, that was the absolute game changer. Facing a severe economic crisis, the government initiated sweeping liberalization policies. This pivotal shift stripped away a lot of rigid bureaucratic controls, unleashed market forces, and allowed the private sector to just expand rapidly. It completely set the stage for the dramatic, world-altering growth story we're witnessing today. All right, Section 4, the shift toward development, the economic transition. So the big question is, how does a nation dealing with such immense poverty and population pressure actually transform into the world's 5th largest economy? The answer lies in a massive structural transformation. Just look at the GDP shift between 1973 and 2023. The reliance on the primary agricultural sector plummets by more than half, dropping to 18%. Meanwhile, the secondary manufacturing sector more than doubles, and that tertiary service sector we bookmarked earlier,
it balloons to over 55% of the total GDP. When we break down the modern numbers, it's just undeniably clear. The service sector is the absolute engine pulling India out of stagnation. What's actually incredible to think about is that the service sector employs nearly a third of the population, yet it generates more than half of the country's total wealth. That is a textbook indicator of an economy that has aggressively and successfully transitioned from underdeveloped to rapidly developing.
And honestly, the momentum is just fierce right now, with robust overall GDP growth hovering around 7% and a massive Make in India push to boost domestic manufacturing. The country is rapidly integrating into the global market. Whether it's the booming IT and e-commerce sectors that probably touch your own digital life, or the massive surge in foreign direct investment, the signs of a modern developing powerhouse are literally everywhere.
Next up, Section 5, Structure, Planned, and Federal Organizational System.
To handle this explosive growth while still actively managing that lingering poverty we talked about, the Indian system relies on two foundational pillars. First up, it operates with the DNA of a planned economy. Starting way back in the 1950s with the Planning Commission, India used structured 5-year plans to allocate funds and set targeted growth rates. Now, while the 1991 reforms brought in a lot more market freedom, centralized economic planning remains essential. In 2015, this system evolved when Niti Aayog replaced the old Planning Commission, shifting the strategy to better fit the fast-moving reality of a 21st century economy.
Second, because of its vast size and diversity, India functions as a federal economy. Economic power is carefully distributed across 2 levels. You have the central government taking overall responsibility for guiding the macroeconomy, controlling major national assets like the Indian Railways, postal services, and atomic power. And in contrast, the state governments have jurisdiction over vital day-to-day activities like public health, education, local electricity grids, and agriculture. So this all brings us to the ultimate high-stakes juggling act, our central paradox. On one hand, we see the soaring strengths of a global superpower. It's the fastest-growing economy, has vast foreign exchange reserves, incredibly skilled manpower driving a booming service sector, and it's an irresistible magnet for foreign investors. But then, pulling in the exact opposite direction are the heavy anchors of its underdeveloped roots. A massive workforce trapped in low-yield agriculture, staggering population pressure, low per capita income, and striking wealth inequality.
And finally, Section 6, Conclusion. The future awaits.
We have explored the dual nature of this massive economic engine and seen exactly how India leverages a mixed federal structure to transition from an underdeveloped agrarian society into a developing service sector giant. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. Considering its vast, untapped natural resources, a massive and increasingly digital consumer market, and booming foreign investment, is this paradox of progress inevitably going to crown India as the world's 3rd largest economic power by 2028, overtaking giants like Germany and Japan? It's a fascinating question, and watching it unfold will undoubtedly be the economic story of the decade. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.